All right, everybody, welcome to this chess lesson. The topic today is all of the chess opening principles are the same principle, and I have to show you how that is true. What we're going to do today is we're going to look at all of the opening principles, and we're going to show you that not only are they all mostly the same thing, but you have to learn when opening principles are worth not following. Because if you always follow them, sometimes that will get you into trouble. So I'm going to review a couple of opening principles with you, just so that we can get on the same page. The first one that you always hear every chess coach talk about is attack the center. So these four center squares, that's what you're trying to do. You want all your pieces to come off the back row or go near the middle and attack the center. We learned that the bishops and knights are the main pieces that come off the back row to attack the center, and the rooks and queens kind of stay back on the back row or very close to the back row and attack the center. So that's one thing we learned. We also learned that castling your king is extremely important. So let's get a castle king real quick. Okay, here we go. So castling your king is very important, and the reason we do this is for safety. And safety is one of the three things we're going to be looking at today. The third one is teamwork. So in this position here, we've got, here, I'll go ahead and add some teamwork to this. So we have three pieces working together from white's position, attacking the d5 square, which is this, this red circle square. So they're all using teamwork to attack the same thing. So basically, every single opening principle that you learned, or that you will learn in the future, because we didn't teach all of them, there's a whole lot of them, all of them involve getting your pieces safe to safety, using teamwork with your pieces, and attacking the center. That's it. Everything does that. So if you think about castling, for example, castling is about getting your king safe. Attacking the center is about attacking the center. That's a pretty easy one. Not moving the same piece 2 or 3 or 4 times is about teamwork. For example, we've given situations in chess where like this might happen. I think I did an example in one of my lessons that did this, where this knight just keeps moving over and over again, and eventually he gets captured. So if you move the same piece over and over, you might potentially make your piece unsafe, and you aren't going to be able to do teamwork because you're using one piece over and over and over again. I often tell people moving the same piece multiple times is kind of like ignoring your teammates when you're playing sports. You can't do everything by yourself, and a single chess piece cannot do everything by itself either. So you need to have lots of pieces working together towards a goal. We also talked about developing your pieces. That's the very definition of teamwork. If you don't bring out all your pieces, you'll never, ever, ever have teamwork. And again, a lot of this might sound like repetitive or the same thing over and over, but the point is, all of these opening principles are essentially the same thing, just phrased a little differently. Here's one we did not cover in our lessons that actually came up a little bit in some of our lessons, but we didn't point it out because of our lesson focuses. But right here, F4, moving this F pawn up is very dangerous in a lot of situations because you can be attacked really quickly like this. Like, look what happens. Uh-oh, we just lost our rook to a queen fork where the queen attacks the king and the rook at the same time. So moving your F pawn is very bad in chess. You don't want to do that. Okay, let's see. Let's go back. Oh yeah, there's another opening principle called connect your rooks. That means make it so that your two rooks can see each other. So let's look at that really quickly, just for fun. Okay. I'm going to connect my rooks by getting all of my pieces out. We talked a little bit about this with the dream position when I talked about setting up dream positions last week. Look at these rooks. They can see each other. And whenever you play chess, if your rooks can see each other, that means you developed all your pieces and got them off the back row. So again, you have a situation where I could say connect your rooks, but that's the same thing as me saying develop all your pieces to attack the center. It's the same thing because you can't do one without doing the other. Let's see. Oh, here's another funny one. We did not talk about this one, but we have this rule in chess called develop your knights before your bishops. And the reason we say that is your knights pretty much all want to go to these squares. We know that in advance. There's not a lot of changing from that. We know that. So we put our knight here. But this bishop right here, he might want to go here, or here, or here, or here, or take something. So for example, if black played this move, we might consider taking that because it messes up these pawns. Or let's say black went here. So I go there, and then their bishop comes in. Maybe I want to put my bishop here to challenge their bishop because they have a really great bishop. So I would take it, or maybe we would trade off like that. Another example might be if, let's say this knight comes here, we're attacking there, and they defend their pawn. We might bring the bishop here to take that knight, like this. So the idea is the bishop always has multiple choices, and the knights really don't. But both the idea of developing your knights before your bishops is the same thing as saying develop your pieces in a safe way with teamwork, either attacking the center or pieces that attack the middle. Okay, so let's look at some examples of how this could go about. Oh, I moved all my my faces. I need to put the faces over here. Okay, so let's look at this example here. Okay, sorry, I had to organize some stuff. So in this position, or in this game, you're going to see that the black king will not be able to castle, but it's not a big deal. See, normally we tell you castle your king really early in the game, and 90% of the time that's really important to do. But here we're going to look at a time where it's actually good that black didn't have to do that. So watch what happens. Oh yeah, actually let's back up a little bit. So here I just moved, or black just moved, I'm sorry, white just moved their knight twice. That breaks our opening principle of don't move the same piece multiple times. And here you can see that the red arrows right here they're both attacking the f7 pawn, and there's only one defender, which is the king. So there's only one good defense to this move, and that's moving the knight to the edge of the board. We've told you all don't move the knight to the edge of the board. But here's an example where moving the knight to the edge of the board was actually a really great move. So watch what white does. White moves their knight a third time, sacrificing the knight. That means giving the knight away for a pawn. And now this king cannot castle because he's moved. So the queen comes out with a really cool looking fork. She's attacking this bishop all the way over here on the c5 square and the king at the same time. So the king gets out of check by blocking, and then the queen takes, and suddenly we have a situation where black looks like they're really in danger because this king is like really alone right here, but it's really white's king that gets in big danger. And the reason is this queen came out and keeps moving a whole lot. So watch what happens. Oh yeah, the other thing to point out too is just a couple of moves ago. Look at this. We had two pieces developed for white. And then when we go forward in time a little bit, back to here, white only has one piece developed. So white traded off all of their pieces that they developed. And now we don't have much development for white. So that's not good. So you'll see the d6 pawn attacks the queen and lets the dark square, or the dark bishop out to the g4 square if it wants. So watch this. This rook is attacking the pawn and threatening to check the king potentially. So white backs up, attacking the king, but it's not a big deal because we just block the check and continue attacking. So now we're threatening to win this pawn on e4 for free. So watch what happens. Uh-oh, this is not good. We're defending this pawn on d4 with our queen, and we are now attacking the queen with our e4 pawn. And we also have, I'm going to make some scary red arrows. We have the queen and the rook attacking this way. This is really bad for white. White's in trouble. So white takes back, queen to h4 check. And as you can see, not only is this a check on the king, but the queen and the rook are using teamwork to attack the pawn on e4 right here. It's that critical teamwork thing. So while black's king looks like it's unsafe, it's only unsafe if they can attack him. And so far, they haven't been able to do that. So white gets out of check with this pawn, and it does attack. I forgot to show in a red arrow. It attacks the queen. But because of teamwork, the black queen is helping the black rook take the pawn, and it's check. So you always have to get out of check. So white cannot take the black queen right now. They got to get out of check first. So king to f2 gets out of check just fine. The queen retreats to e7, continuing to guard the rook. That's very important. So the rook comes down, attacking the knight comes out, attacking the rook. And you'll notice that there is a good point here. Basically, white attacks the rook, and black defends the rook, but now white attacks the rook a second time with their knight. So the rook is in danger, but we have to do something about that. So black moves the rook down one square, attacking the queen. Now you'll see that green arrow by the queen. She is defending this e2 square, because if that rook is allowed to move here and check the king, white is in big trouble, probably checkmate territory if we're not careful. So the white queen has to continue to watch that square. And you'll notice all these undeveloped pieces. This is getting bad for white. So the queen runs away but continues to watch the square. c6 attacks the queen, daring the queen to go take that knight. But that would be very bad. Watch what happens. If they took the knight, it would be checkmate in 3 moves, like this. Uh-oh. And then we have checkmate. So that would be really bad. We don't want that. So the queen, instead of taking the knight, goes all the way to f1, so it can keep watching that e2 square. But then the bishop goes over here and says, go ahead and take me. If the bishop takes, we have checkmate in 9 moves, which is crazy to think about. But basically, you can see how weak this king gets. He has to go all the way up the board. You have to give up your queen here. You don't really have a choice. This is very bad. And then we bring our king in. And then again, we're going to checkmate the king and attack him. We don't need to look at the whole checkmate, though. Okay, so the queen, instead of taking that bishop, because that's really tempting, she runs away, continuing to guard the e2 square. But then, this is a sneaky move here. That rook lines up with the enemy king, and he's going to attack in a moment. So the knight blocks, and then here the game is over. White ended up resigning the game, because as you can see, we've got 1 rook attacking and 2 rooks attacking. We've got a bishop attacking this way. Heck, we've even got this pawn attacking, and the queen's going to come in a minute too. So as you can see, black ended up with a very unsafe king, but black didn't have the problems because black continued to develop their pieces. White did not. If you look at this position, all of black's pieces have moved and done something useful, whereas 3 of white's pieces haven't moved, and one of them, the queen, she moved back to her original square. And that's terrible. Like, it's really bad when you have to move your piece back to its original square, because it's kind of like it never moved at all. So I'm going to go over one more game very quickly. This one will be much faster, and then we'll take questions after that. Okay, so this game here is a game where black doesn't get to develop his pieces or get castled. So it's similar to the other one, but this time black is the one who's going to lose. Now here's one thing to note. We break an opening principle. We move the f-pawn. So I briefly told you all that moving the f-pawn is not good in chess, and it generally isn't. But let's look at how this game goes. So white plays this crazy f-pawn move, and black starts defending their f-pawn with their g-pawn. So this is kind of a weird way to play chess. But watch what happens. So just like in the last game, here we'll go back to the very beginning of the last game, actually. See, in the last game, white also brought the queen out in the same way. Here, we brought the queen out with the bishop. So let's look at those two positions just for fun. So here we've got this position where the bishop takes on the f7 square, and then over here we have the same thing. But there's going to be a big difference. Last time, black ended up winning, but this time he won't win. So watch what happens. Check. So we're attacking the king, and remember, any time that you're in check, you have to get out of check. You have no choice. Like in this position, it's not possible to bring this knight out because you're in check. Whoops. Because you're in check by this knight on e5. So the king makes a big mistake. He plays king to e6. If he had gone back to e8, he probably would have been okay because he's up a piece. But because he comes forward, that's a huge mistake. So watch what happens. The queen comes out attacking the king. So the king takes another piece. And now the queen gets really close to the king. This is really bad for the king. So he runs away. And then d4. Now d4 is kind of a neat move because it attacks two new squares with the other pawn. So we have a little bit of teamwork going. That's very important. Remember, I told you all the opening principles are basically the same thing. Here you can see that pieces are team working together to attack this king. That's the big difference between this game and the previous game. So black tries to develop, but this was not a very good move. Probably running the king away, or maybe bringing your queen to, actually no, f6 doesn't work, but yeah, probably running away is the best move. But anyway, he goes here. So the bishop takes the pawn with check. Again, teamwork. We got four pieces working together against the king. So he runs over to here. And now we have a check here that if the king moves, we'll take the queen for our bishop. Since the queen is worth 9 and the bishop's worth 3, that would be very bad. So black has to block the check. Now, a lot of people would take this bishop. That would be a mistake because once you take back, you're allowing black to develop. So you don't want to let your opponent develop. So we attack this f6 square, forcing the bishop to take, and we take again. And as you can see, if this king were to move up again, we could take that queen for free. So the king must go backwards to keep guarding that queen. Now again, this king has moved a whole lot. It's moving the same piece over and over again. That's very bad. So, but the white queen is also moving over and over. So that's kind of weird. Remember at the beginning we told you that every opening principle has a situation where you can break that opening principle. So in this situation, the queen is moving a whole lot, and so is the king. But you'll notice that the queen is making a threat every time. Whenever she moves, she's attacking. When you make the same piece move over and over again, if you keep attacking, then that's going to be one of those exceptions. So the king has to move again. There's no choice in that situation. Now we castle. And again, you can see these arrows demonstrate teamwork. Basically, the queen is threatening to come into this f7 square and attack the king, and it's going to be checkmate. Like if you did this, that's checkmate. Because the king can't run away because this pawn attacks it. And all the other squares can be seen by the queen or are blocked. Like the black queen is keeping the black king from moving to d8. So that's the threat. We have a simple teamwork threat here. So the black queen tries to stop that threat. Well, we move the queen again, but this time, once again, it makes a simple threat. So the king moves up because that's really his only choice. We check again. And now this time they get to capture. So it's like, oh no, white gave up a rook for a knight. But again, as long as you're able to attack, especially if you're attacking the king, these kinds of moves are okay. So the king has to go to the middle of the board. This is exactly where the king does not want to be. Being in the middle is like the worst. So we develop with check. Again, as long as we're attacking that king, these pieces on black's back row cannot move. So the king takes a pawn. The queen comes in with a check. Again, she moved again, but with an attack. So the king has to run away. Now we have a pawn helping out, and it's also defended by the queen, so the black king can't take it. So he goes to c6. Queen goes to c4 with another check. The king's only move is b6, and then checkmate. So in this example, you can see that we end the game with black having 5 pieces on the back row, and white has 1 major piece on the back row. Perhaps the funniest thing is white has their king on the back row, but black's king is absolutely not on the back row. So this is kind of a funny game where the white king is where he's supposed to be on the back row in a castled position, kind of off to the side. The black king is on the front row, or he's on his 3rd row or the 6th row, kind of being the only piece that's developed and attacking. So that's not very good. Okay, so I am ready to take questions about the lesson, about when developing is good or bad, when an opening principle is good or bad, that kind of stuff, or the examples I chose.
I had a question.
Yes.
There was in the game we just played. There was an area when he was in check before, like with the queen and a rook, when he was on like f8 or something like that.
This one?
I think like the move before, like the last one before. Yeah. Couldn't he have moved to f7?
No, because the rook is watching. Yeah, in this situation, he had only 2 ways out of check. One is the obvious king move, which he did. The other one is lose a knight for free and give me checkmate. So that would be even worse. So he decided to do e6. This is actually a famous game from a long time ago. So, yep. So there you go.
Thank you for teaching me a famous game.
Yep, you're welcome. All right. Next question.
Why can't the queen move to if like you move the rook to f8 and the queen attacks? Well, couldn't you move the queen so that eventually you would lose you would lose the queen if like the rook moved up but the queen was already there, and then
well, your question is, it's getting a little lost in the weeds, because when you say up there, and you don't use notation, it's hard for me to follow what you mean. Do you mean in this position?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you saying if the rook moves to f6 with check, like in the game, or all the way to f8?
So if it moved to there,
where is there?
To f6, and then
F6,
the queen,
okay.
And then the queen moved to f5.
Okay, well here you're in check, or black is in check. So he's got to get out of check. But are you saying if I move my queen to f5 now?
Yeah, and then the rook attacked the queen. Then you lose a rook for a queen.
Okay, so we'll waste a move over here for black. And I believe you were talking about moving to f8 like this.
Yeah.
Okay, the problem with this is when the king is super, super weak in the middle of the board like this, he is the target, not this queen back here. This queen, like, we could definitely do this, but technically the queen could move up like this, and we might be able to take this bishop, for example, but we're not going to get their queen. Like, it's going to be really difficult to trap their queen in that way. So I think the most important thing for you to take from this, in this position before we play that rook up, what you have to think about is, all right, how do I attack the black king? There are two moves here that I think are very good. Actually, three moves. The first one is queen g4. The second one is rook f6. And the third one is d5 check. Those are all checks, and they all attack the king. And they all use teamwork to try to go get the king. And that's really the lesson's goal, is to look at teamwork and understand how these things work out. Does that make sense a little more, Moira?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. I can do one more game. John, we can stop questions for now. And I will do this last game, and I will do it pretty quickly. I think it's actually the shortest game that I had to go over. But this is one where white has a lot of development and black doesn't castle this time. So basically, you'll see right now nobody's made any mistakes. White's castled. Both sides have various moves, or various pieces developed. Both sides have a little bit of teamwork going on. Like you could look at, the green arrows are white's teamwork and the black arrows are, the blue arrows are black's teamwork. But here he moves that F pawn, that pesky F pawn. So here we're going to blast open the center. Look at this. All these pawns are just attacking like crazy. And then he goes forward. This kind of stops that knight from coming out. So anytime in chess you can prevent your opponent from developing, that's actually often a good move too. Okay, so now we have this E file open up. This is very dangerous for black. So he attacks the king straight away. And now we do this. It's one of those things where white has now moved this knight twice once again, but we have a threat on the board. The other thing too, remember we moved that F pawn back here? Well, notice that our bishop as white attacks all the way down here, which means black cannot castle or they would be in check. So when we go back forward and we look at this check, we play there, making a threat to attack the queen and the rook. That's a fork. And you'll notice that the bishop is guarding that knight. So that's a safe move for that knight to make. So again, this knight has moved two times, but he's making a really, really important threat. So black comes up with I think a clever move. It attacks this bishop and guards against the fork at the same time. So that's kind of neat. That's actually kind of a neat defensive move. But unfortunately, it's not quite good enough. Because here, we attack the knight, and we create what's called a pin. That means if this knight moves away, we will be able to take their queen, because their queen is a very valuable piece sitting behind the knight. You'll learn more about pins and stuff later. But anyway, pin pieces need to be guarded. So the knight moves over here so that he can guard his buddy on e5. So we take, this knight takes, and then we move to f7. Now this is kind of crazy. Let's break this down. First of all, these pieces are not moved. They're undeveloped, not doing a good job. This is not good. White also has some undeveloped pieces. However, those pieces have been largely not necessary. This queen has actually made some threats herself, but this rook and this bishop and this knight, these three pieces are making enough threats that we don't need these other pieces just yet. And thirdly, we have our fork. We also have a fork here. This knight attacks the knight on e5, so we're threatening to win the knight and then take the rook. So like if this queen were to like say move over here, we might take here with check, the king might run away, and then we could either take the bishop or take this rook. Either way, probably take the bishop because we keep our knight that way. So, I mean, yeah, we keep our knight this way and our rook. So anyway, my point is whenever you're playing chess, you want to make sure that you learn opening principles and follow them. When you're following opening principles, you need to understand that all opening principles are essentially the same thing. I'll show you my notes here in a second. Let me pull these back up. Here's the notes over here. You can see them basically safety with teamwork and attacking the center. That is how you should begin the chess game. You develop your pieces so that they are safe, that they create teamwork, and that they attack the center. And here's a list of all of the opening principles that you want to learn and stuff like that. So a lot of our videos that we did over the past month have covered those, but there's a whole lot more than this. There's probably 100 opening principles if you wanted to really look for them. But just know that all opening principles are trying to get you to develop your pieces with these 3 goals in mind. And that's the main part of the lesson. And going forward to the next lessons, we're going to bring these themes up when they come up. Yep. Thank you all very much for attending.
Bye.
Hope you have a good chess day.